Typhon. And Typhon was one of the most horrendous monsters. And he decided to go against Olympus. With his wife Echidna, many of the creatures that terrorized communities and were subdued by heroes were born. Like, so you had Kerberos, and you had the Stymphalian birds, and you had the Nemean lion, and all sorts of fabulous beasts that came about from Typhon's loins. So Typhon was going to take on Olympus, and the Olympians fled because Typhon was that frightening. And they went to foreign lands, according to the myths, and they hid from Typhon. So when they went to Egypt, for instance, they wore animal masks. And the reason I shared this story at the beginning is to show that the ancient Greeks had a different view of culture and cultural appropriation than we have today. So when they borrowed elements from other cultures, it wasn't a big deal. It was how they communicated. And the Greeks incorporated a lot of concepts from the societies around them, and the societies around them, of course, incorporated many elements from the Greeks into what they were doing, and they communicated in this way. The Greeks started this, and then the Romans continued it, and it was a very good way of building bridges. So when they went to a new bunch of people, they would look at their gods and hear their stories and say, oh, yes, we know him under a different name. That's Zeus, and that's Hera, and that's Dionysus, and that's Hephaestus, and that's Hercules. And this way they would start communicating in that manner, and they started putting together charts, which is where we're going to go with this inquiry in a little while. And Herodotus, who is the father of history, he used to be called the father of lies until archaeology started bearing him out with a lot of the more fantastic things he said. He picked this ball up and he ran with it. So he pointed inconsistencies out in the knowledge of the Greeks, and I'll give one example, the one that I've studied the most. Hercules, he found, was a late addition in the Greek myths. He was the son of Amphitryon or Zeus and Alcmena, and he was born in Thebes, and he lived during the time of the Argonauts, a generation before the Argonauts went on the expedition, before Troy. And he found that in places like Tyre and Phoenicia and in Egypt, the figure of Hercules was actually thousands of years older than the Theban version or the Greek version of Hercules. So in Egypt, he found the god Shu and made the correspondence with that Egyptian deity as Hercules. And this seems puzzling initially, and I spent many years meditating on it until it became clearer to me, but it remained very murky. And Shu is, imagine a combination between Zeus and Atlas. And you have an idea of Shu. Shu was the one who kept heaven and earth apart to allow things that are in the middle to survive and thrive and grow and exist. And this figure got immortalized as Atlas, and Atlas was part of Hercules' story in the 11th labor, when he went after the apples in the Garden of the Hesperides. So that was the Egyptian figure. And in terms of the ancient Near East, it was the figure of Melkite. And Melkite was the king of the city in Tyre. And he was very similar to Hercules, and by the time of the Roman Empire, they were pretty much identical, although initially there were more vast differences between them. Before I proceed, are there any questions so far?
There are not any hands raised or any questions in the chat yet, but if people do have questions, feel free to raise your hand or put a question in the chat, and I will interrupt Hercules with them.
Okay, thank you very much. So Melkart himself entered Greek mythology as Melikertis, and he's kind of like the drowned god, And this was an older cycle of mythology than the Indo-European revitalized Pelasgian mythos that we come to know now as Greek mythology. And it was along the same parallels as the gods that existed of the Pelasgians. Like, for instance, in Samothraki and in Lemnos, they had the mysteries of the Kabiri. And the Kabiri were the same as the Idaean dactyls in Crete. So it was an older system of mythology. The Dioscuri, Castor and Pollux, or the twins, or the constellation Gemini, also rose out of this older mythology. The pre-Greek empire was called the Pelasgi, and they extended pretty far. They encompassed Greece and the islands that were further south toward Africa and toward the ancient Near East, and also into the Black Sea. So some of the weirder things in Greek mythology are from that earlier time, and remnants of them survive here and there. And so when you're exploring that particular territory, a lot of the strange happenings that are described that don't sound archetypal but just sound weird, they actually refer to older myths in older times. And Melkart, as I mentioned before, he was known as the king of the city to the Tyrians, and he had a wife, or one of his wives, which was Anat, and she was very similar to Athena in very many ways. Now, in the older stratum of Greeks, I'm a Lemnian Greek, so that's why I focused on this particular area. And the Lemnian Greeks are related to the Trojans, and also they're related to the people in Tuscany, the Etruscans. So elements of this older mythology survived over there. And the Phoenicians in Greek mythology, the story that survived about them is when Europa was taken away by Zeus. One of her brothers, Cadmus, in his wanderings, he founded the city of Thebes. And he was a very Herculean type of hero himself. But Thebes is where the Greek Hercules was said to have been born and to have grown up. And there was a lot of worship of the older Phoenician Hercules there, or Melkart. And Cadmus, among other things, is credited with giving the Greeks their alphabet, which is based on the Phoenician alphabet. Prior to the Phoenician alphabet's adaptation, the Greeks had Linear A and Linear B, which I think one of them has been deciphered and the other one is still in the process of being deciphered. But Cadmus brought in the letters from the ancient Near East, and they were then adapted and they survived to the present day. They in turn influenced the Italian alphabet out into Europe, and it's been shown how they even evolved into various forms of runes as they made their way up north. And Herodotus, who made these associations, also tells the tale of Hercules seeking to connect with his father Zeus and going to the oracle of Ammon in Libya, which was said to be a true oracle, and inquiring there and being sent on a quest, not knowing that Ammon was his father Zeus in his ram disguise. And the ram then plays a part in the Golden Fleece and other type of Greek quests in the mythology. I'm going to apologize for stammering a little bit. I can't see or hear anybody, and because of the connectivity problems, I don't know if we're connected. I'm used to some interaction both on the podcasts and in Zoom. So anyway, if there are any questions, again, please just...
Hercules. Sorry, if people do have any thoughts about these connections, please feel free to ask them. And
Okay.
Hercules.
Yes.
It's Elenana.
Hi, Elenana.
Go to the bottom of the screen. There should be a little camera, and it probably has a line across it.
Okay. Do I press that?
Yep.
Okay, I just did.
Okay, give it a second and it should, there you are.
Okay, there I am. So I
There
can be
you
seen and
are.
heard.
And
Uh,
I will show my face so you know who I am.
Thank you very much.
Um,
I see your
and
name, Helena.
yes, it takes a couple of seconds to do that. So, oh, nope, nope. It didn't go off. Oh, there we are.
There you
Oh,
go.
hi.
Thank you very much. I'm greatly appreciative.
You're very welcome.
Um, okay, so we went through a rambling background type of thing, and so now we'll get into the meat of the presentation. Um, Now, are you familiar with the labyrinth? And I'm nodding here to Athena. The labyrinth tale in Greek mythology. Okay, I will give a brief summary.
Yes,
Uh,
people are saying yes, but yes, please give a brief summary.
There was a young man named Theseus who was raised by his mother, and his father was said to be a king who wandered through the area and then left his son there with his wife while he went and kinged it in Athens. And he buried underneath a rock, a very really really heavy rock, his sword, his sandals, and some other things, with the instructions that when Theseus could lift the rock and get those things, then he can come to Athens and claim his throne. So Theseus, of course, practiced every day, and it took him very many years until he could lift that stone and claim the sword and the sandals and all sorts of other things. And then he made his way to Athens, and he had very many adventures. And he presented himself at the court of the king and found that Athens was cursed because of a tragedy that happened to the son of the king of Crete, the famous Minos. So, because of that accident, Minos claimed every year seven maids and seven young men, and they were taken to Crete and they were fed to the Minotaur, which was a monster which was half bull and half man. And the Minotaur came about because of Minos's greed. Minos was one of the candidates for kingship in Crete, and he asked Poseidon for a sign that would amaze the people. And then the agreement is that he would give that sign back as an acknowledgement of his servitude to the god. So Poseidon sent a bull that was snow white, and it came out of the sea. And it was beautiful. And the people were amazed, and Minos' legitimacy as king was assured. But then Minos decided not to kill that bull because it was really, really, wonderful. So he gave some inferior bulls that were the best of his particular bunch of cattle, but it wasn't the divine bull. So the divine bull, a gift from the god that's not reciprocal, sometimes becomes a curse, and that appears again and again in Greek mythology. So going back to Europa, Zeus, when he kidnapped her from Tyre, he took the form of a bull and he ran around all over the place with her until he settled in Thebes and gave up his quest. And the bull that was Zeus that Europa was on sometimes zoomed through the sea as well. And there's a connection between bulls and the sea. And earthquakes, which are often associated with tidal waves and other things in Greek history and mythology. But the bull is a very important symbol in Greek mythology and also in the ancient Near East. And in the Greek mythology, the bull from the sea that Poseidon sent became the instrument of Pasiphae, his wife's downfall, because she felt attracted to the bull. And together they had a child, which became the Minotaur. And then Minos brought Daedalus to create the labyrinth to keep the Minotaur in. So in actuality, there were bull dances and all sorts of bull rituals because this was the age of Taurus, but this is how it survived in the stories. Now, labyrinths as Athena can tell you, are very, very old. They've been part of the human experience since the Stone Age, and people have been constructing a variety of labyrinths. And in antiquity, the labyrinths were sometimes structured with 7 tiers. And the 7 tiers, 7 is a magical number. We still have it in our days of the week. And as everybody who's practiced any type of magic or owns a Llewellyn magic book or any other type of magic book knows, in the back there are correspondences between the planets, the days, the colors, and all sorts of other things, including the gods. And although these correspondences are not exactly the same, because no practitioner or their understanding is exactly the same, it is a key that can help you unlock very many doors. So the labyrinth is a representation of not only the microcosm of humanity, but the macrocosm. And in the middle of that, there was a bull. And in the stories, the bull is a creature, it's a beast. It's like Typhon, who terrorized Olympus in the beginning. But the message of the monster is that it's actually a god. So you're given a course of instruction there that is very profound. Greek mythology is full of these figures that are partially human, partially animal. So you have centaurs, you have satyrs, you have fauns, you have Lamias, who are partially snake, and so forth. Some of these figures that are not representative of other fellows are also the children of gods or titans or other deific powers, or their deities themselves. So one of the realizations that comes from the labyrinth, which is again a common symbol, is that when you go inside, and the inside and the outside are the same thing, in a very profound and real sense, because we live in the world we assign meanings to on the outside. So we don't really directly experience what's actually going on at any given point in time, but we're reacting to the stories we either tell ourselves or that our culture has told us are true. And we make our way through these stories, and in the middle of all the twists and turns of the internal and external world, if you're trying to unravel this mystery, you come across a divine figure. And in the ancient Near East, he was often the bull. The divine bull was often thought to be the husband of Erishkakal, and his name was Gugulganda or something similar to that. I'm sure I'm mangling the ancient Mesopotamian pronunciation for it. But his name literally meant in ancient Near Eastern, the inspector of canals, which is a very odd name. I haven't meditated enough to totally unlock the mystery to that one. But in Greek mythology, the name of the Minotaur was Asterion. And Asterion means starry. That's where we get astral, for the astral plane. That's where we get astrology. That's where we get astronomy, from Astra. Astra means starry. And the Greeks had a very different conception of the stars. Again, they believed in the microcosm and the macrocosm through the teachings of Hermes. But they believed that there was the earth, and then there were the fixed heavens, which were like a bowl over the earth. And then beyond the fixed heavens, there was the pleroma, or the empyrean. And that was unknown. That was beyond the universe as we knew it. And the fixed heavens were more or less fixed, although they wobbled. And those were the fixed stars. And planets, or Planites, literally means wanderers. So whereas the fixed stars behave predictably, the wanderers, or the planets, unless you observe them for a very long time, they seem to behave erratically. So until those fixed times were actually understood, it seemed to the ancients that the Astra Planeta, or the wandering stars, had volition. And therefore they were associated with gods, which happened in the ancient Near East, most notably in the time of Babylon. And just like the Greeks left Linear A and Linear B and adopted the Phoenician script, the Greeks had names for the planets before then. Most of them meant fiery or bright or lambent, different variations of that. But they adapted the Babylonian schema for a particular pantheon of gods, and they just gave their correspondences. And we still use that system today, and it was used in the seven different tiers of some ancient labyrinths. Now, for those who don't know, and I'm sure all of you do, but I'll go over it again in case. Okay, our days of the week are based on the Anglo-Saxon or Norse version of this system. So Sunday is the day of the sun. Monday is the day of the moon. Tuesday is from Tu, who is the god of war, or Tyr, he was known more commonly to those who studied Norse mythology, and in Greek he was Mars or Ares. Wednesday is Woden, or Odin as he's known, and he was associated with Mercury or Hermes. Wednesday, no, wait a second. Okay, Wednesday. Thursday was associated with Thor, and Thor was associated with Jupiter or Zeus. Friday was associated with Freya, sometimes with Frigga, and in Greek it was Aphrodite, in Roman Venus. And then Saturday is to Saturn, or Kronos as he's known in Greek. There was no Norse equivalent to Kronos, so they kept the name Saturn. And the planets were believed to be not only outside of us in the sky, but also inside of us. And in the back of those books on Wicca or astrology, anything, and whether these correspondences, they'll usually give you what body parts are associated with the planets as well. So furthering the tie between the microcosm and the macrocosm. Now, each of those is a step in an initiatic process. And when you encounter difficulties in interpreting the order of things, what conclusion do you usually come to? Is there anybody? Like, let's say you bought two books on these things, and in the back they had these charts. But the colors they associated with the planets and the days that they associated with planets were different. How would you resolve that?
Are you meaning in sense as far as pulling in the chakras, like the colors of the chakras, or
Right. In most books, there's like some standard ones that are used, but every now and then you'll pick up a book, and the colors are very different, or the associations very different. I'll give one very quick example. Um, in the Greek mythology system that people are comfortable with through like Goldfinch and not Goldfinch, Bullfinch and Edith Hamilton and the mythology they grew up with in kids' books. Um, the sun and the moon are usually associated with the titans Ilios and Selene, and that's how it exists in most books. But uh, Greek spirituality is not a static thing. And even in reading the simplified versions of the myths or the Victorian versions of the myths, Selene and Ilios were not the only um, luminaries. You have Diana, you have Artemis, who are moon goddesses. In my particular tradition, Athena is the moon goddess, and the other ones are considered avatars of the moon. And with the sun, you have Apollo, you have Hyperion, who's older than Ilios, you have Hercules, and in the newer mythologies, you have the Christ, who's assumed the mantle of the sun. So there, if you came across these lists and they had different gods on them or different colors on them, what would you do? How would you resolve the fact that there's different information given for you to practically use there?
We have a couple of answers from, I believe, the last question in the chat.
Okay.
So let me read them off. Um, it's also, so Sonic writes, it's also a sign of someone, oh, wait, I think hang on. Couple of ways. Personally, I would work with one and then the other and see how they feel different. One may be more powerful than the other. Elowen writes, you could use the colors related to the planets. Sonic adds it's also a sign of someone with a certain amount of adepthood, that they can work with patterns of reality other than the one they ordinarily use. So in your example, the alternate example may have a different purpose or usage. And then Athena writes, day and night, oops, I lost that, sun and moon, colors of the rainbow, 7 chakras. Melvin writes, a lot of Western occultism uses the Hermetic tree of life and the Sephiroth.
Those are all awesome answers, and it goes to the point that the journey that you take by going into the labyrinth or climbing the 7 stairs to the stairway to heaven, to find what is at the vault of heaven and beyond to the pleroma or the empyrean, is an individual journey. And the way I finally cracked this nut, in terms of the contradicting colors and other type of schemes, was when I tried bridging Greek mythology with Theosophy and its version of Greek mythology. And one of the insights that came to me in terms of the arrangements of the colors and the days of the week and so forth was that whoever had written the new theosophical material, they were following our understanding of the order in which the planets existed. But they didn't quite understand why the colors were assigned to these things, so they just kept the colors. So if you go into it without understanding that this person had an insight, and they felt the insight was important enough to include in the system that they were sharing, but they didn't quite know why the colors and the planets had those, and the cosmic rays, had these associations initially. They went with what was there because that's what was there, but they didn't quite understand how their way of looking at things would reassign the colors and the orders and things like that. And this was reinforced in my personal quest by something I was reading on Mithraism. And the Mithraic initiations and the Mithraic order of the days and the planets and things like that were based on an understanding that the people who put that together had of how the planets are arranged. Now remember, the ancients believed that the planets were under the vault of heaven. So the sky was literally on top of the planets, and the planets wandered in the space in between the earth and heaven. So the planets, we have the atmosphere, and then everything is beyond the atmosphere. And the ancients didn't differentiate between the moon and the sun and the planets. They were all Astra Planeta, or wandering planets.
We have a few more comments in the chat.
Okay,
Also might have been to the past.
that's
game.
okay.
So primordial, then Titans, then Olympians, says Melvin. Athena writes, developing a relationship with the deity, meditation, etc. Melvin adds, Oranian, Inalian, Draconian, sorry. Sonic adds an added example, the temple of witchcraft teach different elements arranged for different purposes. Air north, earth south would be for upper world work, fire east, and air south would be for underworld work. Melvin says sublunar, and Sonic says people talk faster than he can type.
I'm sorry. I really wish we were doing this in person. So, anyway, yes, you guys are awesome, and you're very educated in things arcane. And Melvin seems to know an awful lot about this particular mythic structure too. Yes, there are different levels, as we said, in Greek culture. Greek culture wasn't static either. There were the Pelasgi. The Pelasgi did not think of themselves as Greeks because Greeks didn't exist yet. When the Greeks themselves, and I'm Greek and I was raised being taught this, there were 10 different tribes of people who eventually came together during the time of the Age of Heroes and identified themselves as Greeks. And the Trojan War and Homer were considered important, as was Hesiodus, or Hesiod, as he's called in English, during that time, because their writings created this Greek identity, where all of these different people who came from different places or were there before these people came from different places, they all of a sudden all found themselves being considered Greek, and the Greek experience began. But these stories were older than Greece. And if you approach it only from a standard Greek way, or the Olympian way, which is the way that we're very familiar with, that has influenced our culture, you'll miss on a lot of the nuances. And the ancient Greeks, as I started this talk with, did not consider borrowing from other cultures or seeing your reality in other cultures mirrored back in a way that was different than you're accustomed to as a bad thing. They didn't believe in cultural appropriation. They believed in sharing and expanding your understanding. So as they encountered different spiritualities, it's like, now we learned another tale about the gods, something we didn't know, something our gods did among these people. And some of those myths were translated and became Greek myths in the form that we know them and love them today. And others became weird remnants, which we still have, like Melkite, who became part of what the Greeks called Hercules, because he was worshipped in Thebes, brought by Cadmus, who was from Tyre, also became Melikerthis. And there you could see the name with the same associations, because Hercules' father was not only Zeus, but in some old myths Poseidon. Hercules also wrestled the Minotaur in some early versions of the myth. So Disney and Kevin Sorbo actually got that one right. So there's a lot of information there, and it's all an invitation to take your own journey. And just like in ancient times, when they didn't know that something was there or what was there, they would put like dragons or other fabulous beasts. And just like the accounts that they had were travelers' accounts, and they weren't always accurate, all of the information contained in the Greek myths is an invitation to take your own hero's journey. And the layers of understanding that you get by trying to unravel what these myths mean, and how and why the ancients equated figures from different cultures as the same figure, even though it doesn't initially make sense, like with Shu and Hercules. It makes sense when you think about the legend during the Golden Apples, where Hercules trades places with Atlas so that Atlas can go get the golden apples from the garden. And the fact that the ancients believed that there was a continuity, and this exists in ancient texts like Nonnus, between a son of Zeus, Zeus, and then the father of Zeus, that it was part of the same continuity. Justinius also alluded to this with the sons of Jupiter comment that he made that got him in trouble with the Romans. So the ancients saw these similarities, and I believe that it's an invitation, and also it's a reminder that we shouldn't erect walls in our own mind closing us to this information from other sources. So for a less garbled and confusing version of this information, I'm going to be at the Amber Dragon tomorrow. It's a very limited participation thing because we're going to be wearing masks. We're going to observe social distancing. Fortunately, they have a really big space there. It's in Branchville. And we're going to be looking at the goddess or the enchantress Kirki, known as Circe in English. And we're going to be exploring totemic shamanism from an ancient perspective. And again, the Greeks combined these figures, and the combinations conveyed information. They were symbols. And yes, these creatures do exist astrally and etherically, and enough people have interacted with them or incarnated as them to reinforce that particular fact. But they also were shorthand for a type of information, and that type of information can help you in your quest. And if you run into contradictory information, try to figure out why the information doesn't jibe, because sometimes the information that you can glean from trying to unravel the puzzle is the quest item that you were looking for. And I know from my own private journeys that the universe will help you in your quest because synchronicities happen. So that happens in the Greek myths as well. If you're on the right track, you'll start having a bunch of synchronicities. The gods are paying attention, and the gods will give you an indication that you're on the right path. And if you go through the labyrinth, which is again the planets in the body, the microcosm, the macrocosm, and you climb the stairway to heaven, which is again the same thing, the planets in whatever order they're given to you, you will get to the top and find that the beast in the labyrinth is the god that's on top of the pyramid. That it's the same figure all along, and what changed was your understanding of what you were experiencing, the understanding of what you were seeing. The beast within you is not something to fight, and the god within you is not something that you bow down to. They're all part of a totality that is the divine part of you. Any questions?
There was a lot of syncretism. That
Yes.
sounds awful. Excellent are some of the best question to ask when you're stuck is, what do you have to teach me, to the gods?
Very, very good. That is a wise answer. And sometimes just asking the question will get you unstuck.
Excellent. Well, this has been really wonderful, Hercules. Is there any other questions for Hercules? You can unmute yourself and ask the question if you want.
I have a quick question. How are you spelling Melkar? Is it like not Mel?
Melqart. The Pillars of Hercules, they were originally the Pillars of Melkart, because the
Right.
Phoenicians, they were traders, and they not only traded goods, but they traded stories, they traded culture.
So I was thinking about, you were talking about, so linear A, which they're still deciphering right now. So at this time, so they were working pretty much with linear A, right?
Mm-hmm.
More so than linear B, that came in closer towards when the Hellenistic Greeks came into play. Because I'm a little confused about the linear A and linear B.
There were two forms of writing that were in use before the Phoenician alphabet was applied. According to the myths, it was Cadmus who brought this and many other civilized gifts to the people of Greece. And he settled there because of a vision or an oracle that was given while he was seeking his sister Europa, who was taken by Zeus in the form of a bull. And Europe is called what it is after Europa because the chase for her went over this entire territory and took a lot of time. But those were earlier forms. By the time of the Hellenistic era, which was right before, it was after Alexander and before Rome's ascendancy, it was like it spilled into the time of the Caesars, the early Caesars. They were already using the Phoenician alphabet, and the Phoenician alphabet had spread far and wide through the Greeks and then the Italians and so forth.
Thanks. I don't know. I just get that always mix up my timelines because there's so much, like there's a lot of overlapping, and then there's a lot of like cross pollination with some of the myths, that it's really interesting how you can pick them apart and pull them all together. Like even the myth of Lemnos and stuff, you can actually find a lot of that mythos that pieces together where you can create your whole, tradition out of that. And so if I were to look up some Trojan and Etruscan uh, history, I can actually make some connection and find like the whole list of deities to work with as well, could I?
Yes, most certainly so. And there are Etruscan traditions that are arising out of there seems to be like a nativist Italian movement that started with Stregheria, which is a type of Italian witchcraft. And Leyland actually, I guess, inspired it with Aradia to get people to look at the myths, legends, and folklore of Tuscany. But yes, the regional folklore is fascinating. Like for instance, I'm Lemnian, and so there was a labyrinth in Lemnos. Nobody knows what happened to it, but the Lemnians say it sunk in the sea. So there's no need to doubt them, and it did exist because people during Roman times visited them. A lot of information you get from the early archaeologists is false. So, like for instance, they say Schliemann discovered where Troy was. The ancients knew where Troy was. Troy was the Gettysburg of ancient times. A Lemnian wrote a tourist book on Troy, and the Romans used to go there like people now go to Gettysburg. So, the ancients never lost where Troy was. And on the island where, again, I'm from, the people had stories of commerce during the Trojan War, and they had, all sorts of tales. Athena and Hercules are married, and their son is Ares. And you could find that on mirrors from Etruria, Etruscan mirrors, where you have Athena and Hercules like together, and you have like a little kid. So the versions of the myths differ widely. Even who is on the Council of the 12 of the Gotham differs widely, from place to place. So again, contemplating the differences, even when they're mistaken, yields you a lot of information that then will unlock other information too. So it's a worthwhile journey. And these basic things you have in the back of the Llewellyn or Weiser books is your Ariadne's thread. It'll guide you through a lot of it, but you still occasionally find yourself going in circles or stuck, and in which case you have to stop and ask yourself, why am I going in circles? And to see if you can figure that out and prevent going there. And Athena has a show now called Living Labyrinths on our Mount Olympus station. So that represents a different perspective, almost totally to labyrinths as I experienced them and knew them. And I'm learning so much from each of our interactions. And now Laura Perry is joining her this Sunday. So she has tried to reconstruct the ancient Minoan culture. And there were several other, like Lady Rhea. She had been on the show a while back, and she and I met years ago when she had a store in the village, and we were discussing candles. And that's what she became known for later on. And her experience and revelation and interpretation were very different than Athena's or Laura Perry's. But that's okay. Everyone is a facet in a jewel of greater understanding. And if we don't get hung up on who's right and whose tradition is more authentic, and a lot of people do that. I was a Star Trek fan years ago, and I used to go to conventions, and people used to have fights over who was a real Klingon or a real Vulcan or, whatever they happened to be. And they were the real thing, and other people were not the real thing. And we see that being acted out in the political arena now, like who's a real Democrat, who's a real Republican. And again, it's just a way of dividing people and keeping them, from getting out of that conflict. But if you open your eyes and open your ears, you'll gain a greater understanding from everybody and anybody. Because remember, in the Olympian mythos, anybody can be a god in disguise. You don't know. So treat everybody nicely and respectfully, and they might shower you with divine understanding or divine gifts.
Do not turn any beggars away in the street.
That's right.
Bad idea.
And another thing, how can somebody argue with an experience, because they can't tell you that you're wrong and they're right,
Mhm.
especially if your experience is different from theirs. So You can't argue with that.
No, you can't, but people do. I remember during one of my journeys through Greek paganism, what do you call, people used to argue over which calendar, whether you're following the Athenian calendar or the Theban calendar or another calendar, and there were all this, and heated debate is good. You get to learn, you get to, clash ideas. That's okay. But there became like acrimony and animosity, and I don't believe that that's okay. Life is too short. Let other faith systems argue like that if they like to. We shouldn't.
So true.
Thank you so much. It's a great workshop.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Hercules. I think we are all delighted that we got to see your face and to hear your wisdom. So we really appreciate all of the connections you made, and I think it will help inform the rest of the weekend.
Thank you very much for having me. Again, I wish this was in person, and I apologize for not knowing which things to click on and my initial garbled account. But thanks for helping me get through it. I wish you all well, and I'll be back on Sunday for a little while to talk about ancient aliens, which is another way of looking at things altogether. Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Well, thank you
That
so
was
much.
awesome. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Goodbye, Hercules. We'll see you on Sunday.
Okay, thank you very much, Amara.
So I'm going to end the Facebook Live and the recording now.